Back on the 31st of May in 1911, the United States was hit with a terrible tragedy that would later go on to see countless stories, published books, expert investigations, and even movies made on the matter. This tragedy was the sinking of the RMS Titanic, an Olympic-class ocean liner said to be one of the largest, most luxurious, and completely unsinkable boats in the world at the time. Unfortunately, it turns out that these predictions of being unsinkable did not pan out as experts had originally believed, and has been the center of many conspiracy theories and tall tales all throughout history. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we will be going over 4 mysteries about the sinking of the RMS Titanic and what they help to tell us about the event. The story of Masabumi Hosono. During the time of the sinking of the RMS Titanic, it was common for men to be the main victims of tragedies due to the chivalry that existed that promoted the welfare of women and children. The traditional manner in which it was described was that first children would be given a space on lifeboats, and then women would shortly follow with a single member of crew per lifeboat to assist with the steadying, steering, and control of the lifeboat and rescue services. This meant that for the men on board the RMS Titanic, their fates were sealed as soon as the ship collided with the massive iceberg that would later see the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean. Oddly enough, it appeared that was not the case for one selfish man of whom decided to sneak aboard a lifeboat and take the place of possibly another woman or child for his own selfish self-preservation. The man's name was Masabumi Hosono, of whom worked as a Japanese civil servant and, while being a part of the higher echelon of the Japanese public, bought himself a ticket aboard the cruise ship on its maiden voyage. After surviving the incident, however, it appears that everything would very quickly change for Hosono, as the Japanese public harassed and ostracized him at nearly every turn of his life. It appears that after surviving the incident and returning back to Japan, the Japanese people regarded him as nothing more than a selfish coward, and that he was described as being the definition of a dishonorable person. Others claimed that he completely betrayed the Japanese culture and the spirit of self-sacrifice, and that his survival was used as fuel for racist propaganda all throughout Asia and the United States at the time. This would lead to Masabumi Hosono losing his job as a public civil servant and eventually telling interviewers and magazines that he wished he would have rather stayed on the Titanic than to have continued his life living at the center of such public ridicule. Luckily for him, the Japanese public forgave him in light of his apology and regrets, and he soon was returned to his position as a civil servant and was grateful for the chance ever since. Oddly enough, no one is really sure how he survived and managed to get onto a lifeboat without others noticing stowed away, and it has continued to be a mystery to this day as to how Masabumi Hosono survived the whole ordeal. Rigel, the dog who saved lives. Newfoundland dogs are known around the world for being able to tolerate the coldest temperatures, as well as working around the clock to protect their owners from any dangers possible. This appeared to be the case when discussing the events of Rigel, the dog of whom helped to save numerous lives during the sinking of the RMS Titanic. Rigel was the dog owned by the captain of the Titanic, of whom was believed to have perished early on in the sinking of the ship. His dog, however, continued on with his duties, and after the survivors were aboard the lifeboats and the ship had sunk pretty deep, Rigel, the dog, jumped off the starboard bow and landed in the frigid icy waters. Many of those in lifeboats remembered seeing Rigel swimming around almost as if completely unaffected by the temperature and doggy paddling his way onto floating debris or beside lifeboats where he could get a moment's rest. After a long while of waiting for search and rescue, it appeared that lifeboat number 4 was far away from the search efforts of the crews near the area looking for survivors. As the Carpathia came into the region, the crew of which would come to pick up the majority of the survivors, it appeared that lifeboat 4 had begun to drift under the bows of the ship and was at risk of being run down. Although the survivors of the lifeboat did not understand the danger they were in, it appeared that Rigel was well aware. He quickly began barking and alerting the crew of the Carpathia as loudly as he could, whereas the survivors on the lifeboat were already far too weak to allow their voices heard. On board the Carpathia was a man named Jonas Briggs, of whom heard the barking of the dog and noticed the lifeboat drifting closer and closer to the bow. He signalled for the boat to turn, and the survivors were met with the crew of the Carpathia quickly coming to their aid. Rigel would later be adopted by Jonas Briggs and would live out the rest of his days in a home in rural Scotland to a ripe old age. The self-proclaimed experts were wrong. When an investigation into the matter of the Titanic was conducted, the team of investigators consulted with experts of the Titanic and its constructed procedures and worked around the clock to accurately portray the sinking of the ship. They had believed that the ship had originally sunk rather calmly and that the witness interpretation of the ship rising up high and then splitting in half, with his boilers exploding into the sky, was nothing more than survivors giving a traumatized and overly dramatic account of the real-world events. Additionally, they had believed the witnesses to have been making up a variety of false information that spread amongst themselves as they conversed on the ships, of which took the survivors altogether back to the closest port. A number of these false claims were that there were not enough lifeboats for everyone, as the ship was more than capable of holding more than enough lifeboats for the entirety of the crew and the passengers, and that the crew had shot off multicoloured flares into the sky, of which coloured flares were not ever used aboard such ships, and that no such crate of multicoloured flares was ever purchased or stored aboard the ship. Interestingly enough, these self-proclaimed experts on the sinking of the RMS Titanic were proven to be wrong over the next few decades as investigations persisted. It turns out that the survivors' account of the boat sinking was completely accurate upon finding the sunken wreckage back in 1985, of which confirmed the boat's breakup, its steep rise, and the boilers aboard the ship having exploded due to the introduction of freezing cold waters. Additionally, a crate of multicoloured flares was also found in the wreckage, which later uncovered that the flares were seen as experimental flares and were not sold commercially, which leaves many wondering how they got on the boat in the first place. Definitely one of the most interesting finds, however, shows that the survivors' account was completely accurate and that not a single additional lifeboat had been found among the wreckage. As it would later turn out, apparently the manufacturer of the ship refused to add on all the necessary lifeboats required for the number of passengers of which were attending the maiden voyage, as he believed that the clientele would rather prefer to see the boat's beauty and design, and that the view of the ship would be completely obstructed by the numerous amounts of lifeboats required. A book predicted the sinking. Although it has often been regarded as one of the most accurate and strangest coincidences in all of history, it appears that before thoughts of even constructing the Titanic were started, there had been a book written that completely predicted the events that would unfold on the RMS Titanic's maiden voyage. The book was written and published back in 1898, more than 14 years before the ship set off on its journey through to the North Atlantic. The book is titled as The Wreck of the Titan and tells a harrowing tale of the largest ocean liner ship that had ever been built, known as the Titan. In the story, the Titan sets off on its journey and strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean, which causes it to quickly sink. Although that might be more than enough for people to see the coincidences, eerily enough, that does not appear to be the end of it. In the book, the Titan sank in April, the same month as the Titanic sank. Both ships held similar names, both were described as being the largest craft afloat and the greatest works of men. The book claimed that the Titan was over 800 feet long and displaced more than 45,000 tons, similar to the Titanic that was 882 feet long and displaced 46,000 tons. Both ships were described as unsinkable while also utilizing the strengths of a triple screw propeller. Both were described as having a shortage of lifeboats, as well as striking the iceberg at 25 knots on the starboard side, 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. Exactly the same. And last but not least, both ships were described as carrying 2,200 passengers, of which the majority suffered a terrible fate. The cause for these strange coincidences are completely unknown, and even the author himself has been surprised as to the strange nature of the book and the way it matched the sinking of the Titanic. But what do you all think of these strange and unexplainable mysteries pertaining to the sinking of the RMS Titanic? Be sure to leave your questions and answers in the comment section below and help us to grow this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.